being a rapper might look like the dream, the money, the cars, the fame, but there's one thing that lifestyle almost never leaves room for: being a parent. Between studio sessions that run to 6 a.m., tours that keep them on the road for months at a time, and the constant chase for the next check, a lot of these rappers barely see their own kids grow up. And the results? Let's just say the streets don't care whose child you are. Some of these kids, raised in mansions, handed everything they ever wanted, still ended up joining gangs, catching cases, and going down the exact same roads their fathers rapped about escaping. Because at the end of the day, money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy time. And when you're spoon-fed your whole life with no guidance, no structure, and no father in the house, things can go left fast. But before we get into the rappers who dropped the ball, we gotta talk about the one situation nobody saw coming. Because when Nipsey Hussle passed, the whole world mourned. What most people don't know is what happened to his daughter after he was gone.
My daughter's name is Imani Dior. She's 4, and her name means beautiful faith in Swahili, but
She grew up without a father. She fought through a custody war that played out in headlines across the world. She inherited millions, but no amount of money could fill that void. And now, at 18 years old, Nipsey Hussle's daughter, Imani Asghedom, is navigating the streets of Los Angeles on her own terms. And some people are saying she's starting to walk down the same path that made her father both a legend and a target. Imani Dior Asghedom just hit adulthood, and the life she's living right now is something that would break your heart if you knew the full story. And today, we're going to tell you everything. Yo, what's good, fam? Welcome back. If you've been rocking with this channel, you already know we don't do surface-level coverage. We get into the real story. The facts, the family dynamics, the street culture, the heartbreak behind the headlines. And today we're going deep on one of the most emotional stories in hip-hop right now. This is the full breakdown of Imani Asghedom, Nipsey Hussle's firstborn, who just stepped into adulthood carrying a weight that most grown men couldn't handle. We're talking about a young woman who lost her father at 10 years old, got caught in a public custody battle that lasted years, and is now standing on the edge of adulthood in one of the most complicated zip codes in the entire country. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're new, because where this story goes, you're going to want to be locked in from the jump. Let's get into it. Now, before we get into Imani's story, let me keep it 100 with y'all and set the scene. Because to understand what she's living right now, you gotta understand who her father was, where he came from, and what kind of world she was born into. Nipsey Hussle, born Ermias Joseph Asghedom on August 15, 1985, was not just a rapper. He was a community builder, a business visionary, an activist, and a father. He grew up in Crenshaw, South Central Los Angeles, one of the most gang-dense neighborhoods in the entire country. His mother, Angelique Smith, was African American. His father, Dawit Asghedom, was an Eritrean immigrant who fled his country during a war to build a better life in America. So right from the start, Nipsey was shaped by two worlds: the pride and discipline of African heritage and the raw, unfiltered reality of South Central. By the time he was 14, Ermias had already joined the Rollin' 60s neighborhood Crips, one of the most well-known and deeply rooted Crip sets in Los Angeles. This wasn't a choice made out of some thrill-seeking fantasy. In neighborhoods like Crenshaw, the gang structure was the community structure. It was protection, it was brotherhood, it was identity. Nipsey understood that from the inside out. And what made him different from so many others who came up the same way was that he eventually used all of that understanding to try to change it. He started rapping. He started owning property on Slauson Avenue. He opened the Marathon clothing store, literally buying back the block he grew up on. His 2018 debut album, Victory Lap, was nominated for a Grammy. He was having serious conversations with law enforcement and city officials about gang intervention programs. He had cracked the code, how to come from that world and elevate it from the inside. And he was doing all of it while being a father. But here's where we got to address the painful part of the story. On March 31st, 2019, Nipsey Hussle was shot and killed in front of his own store, the Marathon Clothing, on Slauson and Crenshaw. He was 33 years old. His killer, Eric Holder, was a man from the same neighborhood, even affiliated with the same gang. The senselessness of it shook the entire hip-hop community and beyond, and it left behind two children who would have to grow up without their father. One of those children was his daughter, Imani Dior Asghedom. She was 10 years old. So, check it. November 9th, 2008. That's the day Nipsey Hussle became a father for the first time. Imani Dior Asghedom was born to Nipsey and his then-girlfriend, Tanisha Foster. At the time, Nipsey was 23 years old, still grinding in the underground rap scene, putting out mixtapes and building what would eventually become an empire. He wasn't famous yet, he wasn't wealthy yet, but by all accounts, the moment that little girl came into the world, something in him shifted permanently. Now, in the hood, we know that having a child young before you got your footing can go one of two ways. It either pulls you down or it lights a fire under you. For Nipsey, it lit the biggest fire you've ever seen. He openly talked about how becoming a father changed his entire outlook, his entire grind. In a 2018 interview with Stephen Curry, Nipsey said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that in hindsight, having kids was probably the best thing he ever did. That's how he felt about being a dad. That's how much Imani, and later Cross, meant to him. What's important to understand is that Nipsey and Tanisha's relationship was on and off for years. He later fell in love with actress Lauren London, who he was with from around 2013 until his death. But through all the relationship complexity, Nipsey never stepped away from Imani. He was present, he was active, he took her to events, he shared those moments on social media, and multiple people in his circle confirmed over the years that his bond with Imani was something real and deep, a relationship that went beyond just showing up for cameras. Imani grew up watching her father be more than just a rapper. She watched him turn a clothing store into a movement. She watched him host free health fairs in Crenshaw. She watched him sit down with politicians and activists. She got to see the version of Nipsey Hussle that the rest of the world was only just beginning to understand. And in her young mind, that was just her dad. A man who showed up, who cared, who had a plan, and who tried every single day to be a compass in a neighborhood that had none. Former associates and family members have spoken about how Nipsey would emphasize integrity and leadership to Imani, trying to give her the kind of grounding that would carry her through life regardless of what came. For a young girl growing up in the shadow of Crenshaw, those lessons were invaluable. She was surrounded by a complicated world, but her father was trying his hardest to be her anchor. And then, without warning, that anchor was ripped away. March 31st, 2019. Imani was 10 years old. She woke up that morning as the daughter of a living legend in the making. By that afternoon, she became the daughter of a martyr. Let that sink in for a minute. For those who know the culture, losing a father to street violence in South Central is not an abstract concept. It's a specific generational wound. But Imani's loss happened in the public eye, in front of the entire world. The internet exploded. The vigils outside Marathon Clothing drew thousands. The tributes from Jay-Z, LeBron James, Barack Obama, and countless others were everywhere. The whole world was grieving her father, and she had to process her own private pain inside that very public storm. There was nowhere quiet for her to fall apart. The grief had an audience, and that audience never left. Weeks after his death, in May 2019, there was a hearing in LA County Superior Court, and Imani was present. TMZ reported that when she saw her mother Tanisha in the courtroom that day, the emotion in the room was overwhelming. Tanisha reportedly broke down in tears. The hearing was over who would be Imani's legal guardian going forward, and that is where one of the most painful chapters of her young life truly began. Here's where the story gets real complicated, fam. Nipsey's family, his brother Black Sam, his sister Samantha, and his mother Angelique, moved quickly after his death to obtain legal guardianship of Imani. Their concern? That Imani's mother, Tanisha Foster, was not in a position to properly care for her. The family alleged that Tanisha had a history of substance abuse and had been involved in troubling incidents around children. Tanisha, for her part, voluntarily agreed to allow the Asghedom family to take guardianship, at least initially, because she recognized her own financial limitations and wanted to make sure Imani maintained the lifestyle and connections she had built with Nipsey's family. She trusted them, and according to Tanisha, they didn't hold up their end of the deal. In 2022, Tanisha filed a petition to have the guardianship terminated. She claimed that Nipsey's family had used their financial power and influence to restrict her access to her own daughter. She claimed they had promised financial support and involvement that never came through the way it was supposed to. She said Imani longed to live with her mother, that Imani herself was asking when they could finally be together again. There is no longer any need for guardianship, Tanisha wrote in her court filing. Imani routinely asks me when are she and I going to be able to live together. She longs to be with me as her mother. I am begging the court to terminate the existing guardianship. That's some real heartbreaking stuff right there. A mother separated from her child, pleading with a courtroom just to be allowed to raise her own daughter. And on the other side, a family fiercely protecting the child of a man they loved and lost. For years, Imani was caught directly in the middle of all of this. Growing up, grieving, and watching the two sides of her world fight over her in legal documents and courtrooms while she was just trying to be a teenager. Now, the real kicker, and this is the update a lot of people have been sleeping on, is that in March 2025, this custody battle finally reached a resolution. According to court documents filed on March 5, 2025, Tanisha Foster was officially granted joint physical and legal custody of Imani, sharing that custody with Black Sam. Here's how the arrangement breaks down. Imani spends 60% of her time with her mother, Tanisha, and the remaining time with her uncle, Sam Asghedom. As part of the new agreement, Nipsey's mother, Angelique, and sister Samantha step down from their roles as co-guardians. Sam remains the sole guardian on the family side, while Tanisha and Sam share equal decision-making rights when it comes to Imani's well-being. The court agreement also states that Tanisha retains her full parental rights, something she had been fighting to have formally recognized for years. And there was language in the deal confirming that Imani should continue participation in all existing academic and extracurricular activities, whether she's staying with her mother or with Sam. Now, for y'all who might not understand just how significant this is, let me explain. In families dealing with the aftermath of a high-profile death in the streets, especially when money and power are involved, custody battles rarely end this cleanly. The fact that both sides came to an agreement rather than forcing a judge to hand down a ruling says something. It suggests that somewhere along the way, the priorities shifted back to what was actually best for Imani. And Imani, who was turning 16 when this agreement was filed, is old enough that her own voice almost certainly played a role in shaping that outcome. But this ain't just about legal paperwork. This is about a young woman who spent the majority of her teenage years split between two households, carrying the grief of losing her father, living under the scrutiny of the public eye, and never being given a real chance to just be a normal kid. The custody resolution was a step forward, but the emotional damage of those years in limbo doesn't get fixed by a court document. But here's where we got to address something that a lot of people are curious about, because Imani's story doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's connected to how the entire Asghedom family and circle is living now, years after Nipsey's passing. The question of income, legacy, and day-to-day life is central to understanding what kind of environment Imani is growing up in. Let's start with the estate. In November 2023, Black Sam filed a full accounting report of Nipsey's estate holdings, and the number that came out was $11 million. That breaks down like this: roughly $7 million sitting in various bank accounts, and the remaining $4 million spread across business interests, including 100% membership in All Money Inc., 100% interest in Marathon Studios, 100% interest in the Marathon Touring Company, 100% interest in the Marathon Clothing Inc., and Nipsey Hussle's full trademark portfolio. That is a real, functioning business empire, not just memorabilia and merch. The report confirmed that Imani and Cross are the sole beneficiaries of their father's estate, each receiving a 50% share. Because Cross is still a minor, his share is being managed on his behalf by his mother, Lauren London, which technically makes her a part owner of Nipsey's businesses. Imani's share has been managed through the guardianship arrangement with Black Sam. Black Sam has been the engine keeping Nipsey's legacy alive from a business standpoint. The Marathon Clothing is still operational, both the physical store on Slauson and the online shop. Black Sam also confirmed the development of a Marathon Burger restaurant near the original Marathon Clothing location, a fast food concept built on the very same block where Nipsey laid his foundation. That kind of expansion tells you the Asghedom family isn't just coasting on legacy money, they are actively building. Beyond the business side, Black Sam has teased the possible release of new Nipsey Hussle music in 2025, unreleased material that Nipsey worked on before his death. Sam has been careful about it, making clear publicly that if Hussle didn't actually do the verse or work with someone or put together the blueprint for the project, they're not releasing it. That integrity around his brother's legacy is worth noting. He is not trying to cash in on anything Nipsey didn't personally put his stamp on. Lauren London, for her part, has been one of the most public faces of carrying the marathon forward. In 2024, she partnered with Microsoft, Earn Your Leisure, and the Marathon Clothing to launch the Nipsey Hussle 100K Pitch Competition, a grant competition giving $100,000 to Black entrepreneurs to help scale their businesses. That initiative was a direct continuation of one of Nipsey's deepest passions, financial literacy and Black ownership. Lauren has used her platform, her acting career, and her position within the estate to keep that mission alive every year. So when you look at the full picture, the estate, the clothing brand, the music catalog, the community programs, the business competitions, Nipsey's family is not struggling financially. Far from it. But here's the thing that matters most when we're talking about Imani specifically. Money doesn't fix everything, not even close. Now let's talk about where Imani actually is right now, because this is what this video is really about. And I want to be real with y'all about what we know and what we don't, because this young woman is still building her identity and deserves some space to do that. What we know is this: Imani Dior Asghedom was born November 9th, 2008. Depending on when you're watching this, she is right around 17, turning 18, stepping across the line into legal adulthood in real time. She has been living in Los Angeles, split between her mother's home and her uncle Black Sam's household as per the 2025 custody agreement. She's been photographed at family events and community gatherings, and from what we can observe on social media, she is growing into a confident young woman who carries her father's look and his energy in a way that is impossible to miss. In November 2024, Imani posted a clip on social media that caught serious attention. Fans and media alike noted how much she resembles Nipsey, and the response from the hip-hop community was overwhelming love. People who knew her father personally, community members from Crenshaw, and fans from all over the world poured into her comments with nothing but support and well wishes. She has her father's eyes, she has his energy, and to people who love Nipsey, watching Imani step into her own is one of the most emotional things the culture has witnessed in years. There is something about seeing a piece of someone you lost still moving through the world that is both beautiful and almost unbearably bittersweet. But here's where we gotta keep it 100, because this ain't just a feel-good story, and the title of this video wasn't written by accident. There are real concerns circulating about what Imani's life looks like on the street level. Growing up in South Central with Crip culture embedded in her family's DNA, her father was rolling 60s, her uncle Black Sam was deeply rooted in that same world. The reality is that the cultural environment Imani is growing up in has not changed just because her father preached transformation. Nipsey himself spent years trying to step back from that life while still being connected to it. He brokered gang truces, he worked with police departments, he tried to buy back the block and turn it into something different. But the streets around Slauson and Crenshaw don't just transform overnight because a legend said they should. Imani is a teenager growing up in those same streets with those same cultural pressures without her father there to guide her through it. The question a lot of people in the community are quietly asking is, who is watching over her in that specific way? Is Black Sam, a man who has done real work managing the legacy, also doing the intentional daily work of making sure she's not getting pulled into the same gravitational force that took her father's life? These are not accusations. They are the questions that people who love Nipsey are asking out of genuine concern, because they watched a man who tried to transcend the streets get killed in front of his own store. They are not trying to watch his daughter walk that same road. The sad truth is that inherited wealth is no guarantee of safety or direction when the cultural environment around you stays unchanged. Imani will inherit her share of a multi-million-dollar estate, but she's also growing up in a zip code where gang affiliation is still a daily reality, where the memory of her father is painted on murals right outside the very spot where he was murdered, and where everyone who loved Nipsey is watching her every single move. That kind of pressure is something no teenager should have to carry, and she is doing it largely without the one person who was built to help her carry it. Think about what it means to walk into a room in Crenshaw with the last name Asghedom. Think about what it means to go to school, to hang out with friends, to just exist as a teenager while every adult in your orbit either works for your father's estate, grew up in his shadow, or knows every detail of his murder. Imani cannot separate herself from that history because the history lives on every corner of the neighborhood she calls home. The mural of her father's face is around the corner from where she sleeps. The store that bears his legacy is the same spot where he took his last breath. That is not a background detail. That is her daily reality. Now, for y'all who might not be from the culture, let me break this down so it hits the way it's supposed to. In communities like Crenshaw, legacy is everything. When your father is Nipsey Hussle, you are not just his daughter. You are a symbol. You represent something to thousands of people. Everywhere Imani goes in that neighborhood, people see her and they see him. That is both a blessing and a burden at the very highest level. The blessing is the love. No one is going to let anything happen to Nipsey's daughter. Not on that block, not in that community. She has a protective circle that most young women in South Central could never imagine. The Crenshaw community, the extended Rollin 60s family, the business people Nipsey built real relationships with, the activists he worked alongside. They all have a stake in making sure his children are okay. That protection is genuine, but the burden is equally real, because with that protective circle comes a culture. And that culture includes the same norms, values, and gravitational pull that Nipsey himself spent his last years trying to slowly reform, that without ever fully being able to leave. You cannot be Nipsey Hussle's daughter in Crenshaw and be completely insulated from what Crenshaw is. That is not how any of this works. The observations that Imani may be gravitating toward that street lifestyle, following in her father's footsteps, not just musically and entrepreneurially, but in the gang culture that defined his early world, are not shocking to anyone who truly understands that environment. They are heartbreaking, but they are not surprising. This is the cycle. This is the trap that Nipsey was fighting against with everything he had, and the deep tragedy is that his death may have broken the very protection he was building for his daughter. This is not about blame, it is about understanding what is real. At the end of the day, Imani Asghadam's situation is bigger than one girl's story. This is about what happens to children left behind by street violence in communities that are rich in culture but underserved in the kind of structural support that could actually interrupt these patterns and change outcomes across generations. Nipsey Hussle understood this better than almost anyone. He used to say the marathon continues, meaning the work doesn't stop, the grind doesn't stop, the mission doesn't stop. He was talking about himself. He was talking about his community. But most of all, whether he framed it in those exact terms or not, he was talking about his children. Imani is now carrying that marathon. She is carrying his name, his legacy, his blood, and the expectations of millions of people who loved her father and want his story to mean something beyond tragedy. She is doing it as a teenager without him, in the same neighborhood where he was taken, with a family that has done its best to hold things together while also navigating their own pain and public battles. And still, this needs to be said, she is here. She is standing. Every birthday, every public appearance, every video clip she posts is proof that she is moving forward. For a child who lost her father at the age of 10 in the way that she did, in front of the entire world, that forward motion is not a small thing. That is everything. The real question is whether the systems around her, the family, the estate, the community, the legacy infrastructure Nipsey spent his life building, are doing the deep, intentional work required to help Imani become the woman her father believed she was capable of being, the one he was investing in before he was taken. Grief does not run on a schedule. And growing up in the public eye, with no room to grieve quietly, with a whole culture watching and projecting expectations onto you, that kind of pressure can push a young person in directions that no amount of money or legacy can course correct on its own. Imani needed more than a guardianship arrangement. She needed consistent, intentional mentorship. She needed space to figure out who she is outside of her father's story. She needed, and still needs, people around her who love her for Imani, not just for what she represents to the culture. Because Nipsey Hussle didn't just leave behind an $11 million estate. He left behind a daughter who, in the next few years, is going to make the decisions that define the rest of her life. And the marathon he started, the real one, the one that was always about people, not just music, depends on her being okay. Look, fam, Imani's story doesn't have a clean ending yet, and that's exactly what makes it so important to talk about. She's not a closed chapter. She is a young woman right now in real time, figuring out who she is and what her life is supposed to mean. She has access to wealth that most people in her neighborhood will never see. She has a support system built around one of the most beloved names in hip-hop history. But she also has wounds that no dollar amount can close, and a road ahead that requires a lot more than money to navigate with any kind of grace. Nipsey Hussle spent his whole career telling the world that ownership, community, and perseverance could beat the odds. He was the proof of concept. And now his daughter is the next test of that theory. At the end of the day, we want to see Imani win. The culture wants to see her win, not as Nipsey's daughter, but as Imani Dior Asghadam, standing on her own, building something that makes his spirit proud. The marathon continues, and right now, more than ever, it continues through her. What are your thoughts on Imani's story and what her future holds? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to hear from y'all on this one. And if this video hit different for you today, Make sure you smash that like button and tap the video on screen for more deep dives just like this one. We appreciate every single one of you who rides with us. Peace.
My son and what he got going on. But if you end up a person that, you know, the true color thing or whatever, you have 2 or 3 personalities. I can't deal with it. I have to stay safe.
What's good, gang? You are not gonna believe the story I'm about to break down for you today. We talking about Chief Keef's mom and how she is still in the hood, still in Chicago, still living a life that honestly might break your heart once you hear it. No cap. This is one of those stories that shows you fame don't always change everything. And family situations can get complicated even when your son is a millionaire rapper. But before I get into all that, let me remind y'all about the moment she went viral. And I mean viral for the wrong reasons. When one of Keef's biggest ops, FBG Cash, recorded a phone call with her. Yeah, you heard that right. A whole op got on the phone with Chief Keef's mother and put that recording out for the world to hear. Chat, that is wild. That is one of the most disrespectful, chaotic moments in the whole Chicago drill rap beef saga. And it's a moment people still bring up to this day. So stick around, because I'm about to break down who Chief Keef's mom really is, how she grew up, how she met his dad when Keef was actually born, what life looked like for them back in the day when they moved to O-Block, and what happened after Keef blew up and got rich off rapping. By the end of this video, you are going to know the full story. So let's get into it. All right, so first things first, let's talk about who Chief Keef's mom actually is. Her name is Althea Hester, but a lot of people just know her by the nickname Aunt Reese, or sometimes just Reese around the neighborhood. And listen, this isn't some random side character in Chief Keef's story. This is the woman who raised them, who was there through everything, the struggle, the come up, the fame, all of it. Y'all gotta understand, before Chief Keef was Sosa, before he was running the rap game out of Chicago, he was just a little kid named Keith Cozart, and his mama was the one holding things down while the whole world around them was falling apart in different ways. Now let's talk about where she's from, because this matters a lot for understanding the whole story. Althea grew up in Chicago, and not the nice parts of Chicago that you see on postcards. We talking about the South Side, deep in neighborhoods that have been hit hard by poverty, violence, and all the struggles that come with growing up in those conditions for generations. Chat, if you don't know about Chicago's South Side, this is an area that's been talked about in news, in documentaries, in music for years because of how rough it can get. Gang violence, economic struggle, lack of opportunity, that's the environment Althea was raised in. And that's the same environment she ended up raising her own kids in too. It's like a cycle that repeats itself. And honestly, that's one of the saddest parts of this whole story when you really sit and think about it. So get this, life on the South Side wasn't just about the violence. It was also about survival every single day. Families had to figure out how to make ends meet, how to keep their kids safe, how to navigate a system that honestly wasn't built to help them succeed. Schools were underfunded, job opportunities were limited, and a lot of the neighborhoods were basically left to deal with their own problems without much outside help. And that's the world Althea was living in when she became pregnant with her son, who would eventually become one of the biggest names in rap history. Now let's get into how she met Chief Keef's dad, because this part of the story is honestly pretty mysterious, and that's no cap. Chief Keef's father is a man named Roberto Tata Mitchell, but here's the thing, he hasn't really been a major presence in Keef's life or in the media at all. Y'all already seeing where I'm going with this? A lot of these details about how Althea and Tata actually met, how long they were together, what their relationship looked like, that stuff isn't really public information. And honestly, that's pretty common for a lot of families coming out of rough neighborhoods. Relationships form, kids are born, but the full story behind the scenes doesn't always make it into interviews or articles. What we do know is that their son, Keith Farrell Cozart, who the world would later know as Chief Keef, was born on August 15, 1995, right there in Chicago, Illinois. Bro, think about that for a second. 1995. That's a kid born in the middle of the crack era's aftermath, in the middle of gang territory wars, in a city that was already known for having one of the highest violent crime rates in the entire country. That's the environment this baby boy was born into. No cap. That's actually crazy when you really sit with it. So now let's talk about what life looked like for Althea and young Keith in those early years. This is where the story starts to get real personal, real raw. Reports and interviews over the years have painted a picture of Althea raising Keith, along with his siblings, largely as a single mother. And gang, single motherhood in the hood is hard. We talking about working multiple jobs sometimes, trying to keep food on the table, trying to keep your kids away from the wrong crowds, even when the wrong crowds are literally your neighbors, your kids' friends, sometimes even your own family members. That's the reality a lot of mothers in Chicago's most dangerous neighborhoods deal with every single day. And here's where it gets even more interesting, because Keith wasn't just raised by his mom alone in that traditional sense. A lot of people don't know this, but Chief Keef's grandmother played a massive role in his upbringing too. In multiple interviews over the years, Keith has talked about being raised partly by his grandmother while his mom worked or dealt with her own struggles. That's actually a pattern you see a lot in these communities. It's not just nuclear families, it's extended families, grandmothers, aunties, all pulling together to raise the kids because everybody's trying to survive together. Y'all seeing how deep this story already is? We not even at O Block yet. Let's pause for a second and talk about what it actually means to grow up bouncing between your mom's house and your grandmother's house in a neighborhood like this. It's not just about who tucks you in at night. It's about safety nets. If mom's working late, grandma's got you. If something pops off in the streets, you got more than one house you can run to. That kind of setup, as chaotic as it might sound to people outside that environment, was actually a survival strategy. And Keith has said in interviews that his grandmother's house felt like one of the more stable places in his childhood, which tells you a lot about what stability even looked like for a kid in that part of Chicago. So let's talk about the neighborhood Keith actually grew up in before O Block became the name everybody knows. Keith grew up primarily on the south side of Chicago, and a lot of his early life was centered around the Parkway Gardens housing complex. And chat, this is the neighborhood that eventually became known worldwide as O Block. That nickname comes from Oglesby Avenue, which runs right through that area, and it became one of the most talked about, most dangerous, most infamous blocks in all of Chicago because of the sheer amount of violence that happened there over the years. Now here's where I need you to really pay attention, because this is the part that connects everything together. O Block wasn't someplace Keith and his mom moved to later as some dramatic upgrade or downgrade. O Block basically was where they were already living. Parkway Gardens, that whole stretch of apartment buildings and streets, that was home. That's where Keith was running around as a kid. That's where he started making music. That's where the foundation of his entire career and his entire persona as Sosa was built. When people hear O Block, they think about the violence. They think about the rap beefs. They think about all the names connected to it. But at the end of the day, before all of that, it was just a neighborhood where families like Althea's were trying to live their lives. No cap, O Block's reputation got even bigger over the years because of names like King Von, who also came up out of that same neighborhood and constantly repped it in his music before his own tragic passing. So when you hear people talk about O Block now, they're talking about a place that's basically become legendary in drill music culture. But for the families actually living there, like Althea, it was never just a legend. It was everyday reality with everyday danger attached to it. So get this, by the time Keith was a teenager, he had already started making music, recording in basements, linking up with other young artists in the neighborhood, and building what would eventually become the foundation of Chicago drill music as a whole genre. And through all of that, his mom Althea was right there in the same neighborhood, watching her son go from a regular kid on the block to becoming one of the most talked about new artists in the entire country. Bro, that's actually wild when you think about the timeline. Keith started gaining real buzz when he was like 16 years old. And one of the biggest moments was when he got arrested and ended up under house arrest. And during that house arrest period, he recorded the video for I Don't Like. That song blew up, like exploded. Kanye West remixed it. It became one of the most influential drill songs ever made. And all of this was happening while Keith was literally still living in that same neighborhood with his family, including his mom. Y'all are not ready for how fast things changed after that. Once I Don't Like went viral and Kanye co-signed him, labels started fighting over Chief Keef. He ended up signing a massive deal with Interscope Records, and we talking about a deal reportedly worth around $6 million for an artist who was still a literal teenager. No cap, that's actually insane. A kid from O Block, from one of the most dangerous blocks in Chicago suddenly has millions of dollars on the table because of music he made in his own neighborhood, talking about the life he was living. Think about how surreal that must have been for Althea too. One day you're a mother in Parkway Gardens just trying to keep your kids fed and safe. And the next day your teenage son is being flown out for studio sessions, getting co-signed by one of the biggest producers and artists on the planet, and signing contracts worth millions of dollars. That's a level of whiplash most families never experience. And there's no manual for how to handle that kind of sudden change, especially when you're still rooted in the same streets that raised you. So now let's get into the part of the story that I know a lot of y'all have been waiting for. What happened when Keith actually got rich, and what that meant for his mom Althea. Because here's the thing, gang. You would think that once a young black man from the hood gets a multi-million-dollar record deal, the very first thing he does is move his whole family out of danger, right? Move mom out the hood, get her a house somewhere safe, somewhere quiet, away from all the violence and the gang activity. And from what's been reported and discussed over the years, that is something Chief Keef tried to do. There have been reports and statements over time suggesting Keef did try to relocate his mother away from the Chicago streets, away from O Block, away from that whole environment that had basically raised both of them. But chat, here's where this story takes a turn that honestly makes you sit back and go, wow. Because despite Keef's success, despite the money, despite reportedly trying to move his mom into a better, safer situation, multiple reports, social media posts, and that infamous recorded phone call from FBG Cash all point to the same sad reality. Althea ended up back in Chicago, back around the same rough neighborhoods, living a life that really doesn't match up with what you'd expect from the mother of one of rap's biggest stars. And this is exactly why that whole FBG Cash situation became such a big deal in the first place. For those who don't know the full story, FBG Cash was deep in the beef with Chief Keef. This is part of that whole ongoing Chicago drill rap conflict that's honestly been going on for over a decade at this point, with multiple people losing their lives because of it. The FBG name itself, Flyboy Gang, became one of the most prominent names connected to drill beef discourse online, with members constantly going back and forth with O Block affiliated artists for years. And at some point, FBG Cash got Althea on the phone, recorded the conversation, and put it out publicly. Bro, that's actually crazy when you think about how far some of these beefs go, using somebody's literal mother as a way to disrespect them online. The recording spread across social media, people were reacting to it, clipping it, posting it everywhere, and it honestly painted a picture that a lot of fans found really sad. Here's this woman, mother to one of the richest rappers from Chicago, and she's still dealing with the streets, still connected to that environment, still vulnerable to this kind of public humiliation. No cap, that moment right there is what made so many people start asking questions like, wait, why is Chief Keef's mom still around the hood like this? Didn't he get rich? Didn't he move out the city years ago? And that's honestly the core of why this topic keeps coming up over and over in the Chief Keef fan community and across social media, YouTube, all of it. People were going back through old clips, old interviews, old posts, trying to piece together exactly what her living situation actually looked like. And that's part of why this story has had so much staying power online even years after it first happened. So let's break down why this might be the case, because I know y'all are thinking about it just like I am. First thing, sometimes family members, even when they offer a way out, choose to stay close to what they know. The hood, as dangerous as it can be, is still home for a lot of people. It's where their friends are, their routines, their sense of community, even with all the danger that comes with it. Leaving that behind isn't always as simple as just getting a new house in a nicer area. There's an emotional and social pull that keeps people connected to where they grew up, no matter how much money is on the table. People talk about this a lot with lottery winners too. Sometimes the comfort of the familiar outweighs the comfort of safety, even when that sounds backwards to people who never lived that life. Second thing, and this is something we see across the music industry honestly, not just with Chief Keef, sometimes family relationships get complicated once fame and money enter the picture. We don't always get the full, real story about what's happening behind closed doors between an artist and their family members. Maybe there were disagreements, maybe there were issues with how the money was being handled, maybe there's stuff going on that neither Keef nor his mom have ever fully addressed publicly. Gang, we have to be honest. We're working with limited information here, and a lot of this is pieced together from interviews, social media, and reports. rather than Chief Keef or his mother sitting down and explaining the whole situation themselves. Third thing, and this is honestly one of the saddest realities of a lot of these stories. Sometimes the streets just don't let go that easy. Even if somebody physically moves out of a dangerous neighborhood, the connections, the relationships, the history, all of that can pull a person right back in. We've seen this pattern play out across so many different rap stories. Artists who make it out, who get the money, who try to bring their family with them, but somehow the old environment keeps creeping back into their lives one way or another. Now let's talk about Chief Keef himself for a second, because understanding his journey helps us understand this whole situation even more. After that Interscope deal, Keef's career had a lot of ups and downs. He had legal trouble, including multiple arrests and probation violations. He had beef after beef with other Chicago artists, and he lost close friends and collaborators to gun violence. People like Capo, people like Fredo Santana, who was actually his cousin and a huge part of his early come up. Fredo passed away in 2018 due to health complications connected to drug use. And that hit the entire Chicago drill community hard, including Keef personally, since Fredo had basically been right there with him from the very beginning of his career. So while all of this fame and money was happening for Keef, there was also a constant cycle of tragedy happening around him at the exact same time. That's the duality of this whole story. Success on one side, loss and struggle on the other side, happening simultaneously. He'd be releasing a new project, going on tour, getting bigger and bigger as an artist, and at the same time getting news that another friend from the neighborhood had been killed or locked up. That kind of emotional whiplash doesn't just disappear because you've got money now. If anything, it adds a whole other layer of stress and grief that money can't fix. And through all of that, Keef has talked in different interviews about wanting to get his family somewhere safe, wanting to provide for his mom, wanting to change the trajectory for the people closest to him. But chat, wanting something and actually being able to fully execute it, especially when you're dealing with addiction issues, legal battles, industry pressure, and personal loss all at the same time. That's not always realistic, even with millions of dollars in the bank. Keef himself has been pretty open in some interviews about his own struggles with substances and with the pressures of fame, which makes it even more understandable why managing his family's situation from a distance might not have been his top priority every single day. So let's bring it back to Althea, because at the end of the day, this video was about her story specifically. Despite everything, despite her son becoming a global rap icon, despite reportedly having opportunities to relocate, despite the resources that should theoretically be available to her, she has continued to be connected to Chicago, to the streets, to that same environment that raised both her and her son. And that recorded phone call with FBG Cash is honestly proof of just how exposed and vulnerable that makes her, even now, years after Keef first blew up. Bro, when you really sit and think about that, it's actually heartbreaking, because no matter how much money an artist makes, no matter how many records they sell, no matter how famous they get, if their family members are still connected to dangerous environments, still vulnerable to violence, still vulnerable to public humiliation through stuff like recorded phone calls being leaked online, then in a lot of ways, the danger never actually left. It just got more complicated, more public, more painful to watch from the outside. And honestly, that recorded call probably did more damage to her reputation and her sense of safety than most people realize. Because once something like that hits the internet, it doesn't just go away. It gets clipped, reposted, commented on for years afterward, which is exactly what's happening even now as we're talking about it in this video. And that's honestly the bigger lesson in this whole story, gang. Fame and money can change a lot of things. It can get you a different house, different cars, different opportunities. But it can't always undo years and years of environment, relationships, and circumstances that are way deeper than just having cash in the bank. Sometimes the hood holds on tighter than people expect, even when somebody from that same hood becomes a literal millionaire because of music he made describing that exact life. Let's also think about this from a community perspective for a second, because I think it's important when an artist gets famous coming out of a place like O-Block, that neighborhood doesn't just disappear from their life. If anything, it becomes even more central to their public image. Fans want to hear about the block, ops want to bring up the block, and the family members left behind become symbols connected to that whole identity, whether they want to be or not. Althea isn't just Chief Keef's mom to random people online. To a lot of folks following the drill scene, She became a character in this whole ongoing storyline of beefs, loyalty, and street politics, even though she never asked to be part of any of that. No cap, this is one of those stories where there's no clean, happy ending to wrap it up with a bow. We don't know the full details of why Althea is still connected to those rough areas. We don't know the full story behind the FBG Cash phone call situation and how that even happened in the first place. We don't know the complete relationship dynamics between Keef and his mom behind closed doors. What we do know is what's been shown publicly, a woman who raised one of the most influential rap artists of his generation, who came from one of Chicago's toughest neighborhoods, who watched her son go from O Block to international fame, and who, according to multiple reports in that infamous leaked phone call, still finds herself connected to that same dangerous world all these years later. And honestly, gang, that's a story that goes way beyond just Chief Keef and his mom specifically. This is a story you see repeated across so many different rap careers, across so many different cities, across so many different families. Fame doesn't automatically erase decades of systemic struggle, generational poverty, or the deep social ties that come from growing up in neighborhoods like O Block. It's a way bigger conversation about how hard it actually is to fully escape certain environments, even when you have the resources to try. You see it with artists from Chicago, from Atlanta, from New York, from basically every major rap scene in the country. Money changes the artist's life dramatically, but it doesn't always reach back far enough to change everybody and everything connected to where they came from. So that's the full breakdown for y'all today on Chief Keef's mom, how she grew up, how she met his dad. When Keef was born, the early years in Chicago, the move into what became O Block, and what's happened in the years since Keef blew up and got rich off rapping. It's a story with a lot of layers, a lot of sadness, but also a lot of real, raw truth about life in Chicago's toughest neighborhoods, and about how complicated success can be when it's built on top of a foundation that was never really stable to begin with. If you learned something new from this video, you already know what to do. Smash that like button, drop a comment letting me know what y'all think about this whole situation. And if you're not subscribed yet, make sure you lock in because I got way more stories like this coming for y'all. Chicago drill music history is honestly one of the deepest, most layered topics in all of hip-hop, and I'm not even close to done breaking down all of it. I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace.
Boosie Badaz's son just turned 22 years old, and instead of celebrating the milestone the way most young men with access to money, opportunity, and a famous last name would, the internet is buzzing with something else entirely. People are asking why he is still in the hood, why he is still out there in Baton Rouge running with people he does not need to run with, doing things he does not need to do, putting himself in situations that someone in his position has absolutely no reason to be in. His father is a millionaire. His father literally built a rap empire from the ground up in one of the most dangerous cities in the South. His father survived poverty, prison, a murder charge, and cancer behind bars, and came home and rebuilt everything just so his children would never have to struggle. And yet here is Tootie Raw, born Torrance Hatch Jr., the eldest son of Boosie Badaz, still going back to the hood. Still trapping, still drinking lean, still showing up on camera with guns, still running from police, still making choices that have left fans speechless, and his own father brokenhearted and publicly afraid for his son's life. The question everybody keeps asking is the same one Boosie himself has asked on Instagram Live, in interviews, and directly to his son's face. Why? Why would you choose this when you don't have to? And today we are going to answer that question as deeply and as honestly as we possibly can, because this story is not just about one young man making bad choices. It is about identity, about pressure, about the culture, and about what happens when the very thing your family fought to escape becomes the thing their children run back toward. Yo, what's good, fam? Welcome back. If you are new here, this is where we get into the real stories behind the headlines, the full picture the blogs are not giving you. Today we are diving all the way into the world of Tootie Raw and what it actually means to grow up as Boosie Badaz's son in 2025. Let's get into it. Now, before we get rolling, let me keep it 100 with y'all. There is a lot of noise around this topic. People clowning Tootie, people defending him, people comparing him to his dad, people saying Boosie is a hypocrite for being concerned. But we are not here for the noise. We are here for the real, layered, honest conversation about how a kid with every advantage in the world ended up in these situations, and what that says about something much bigger than just him. So let's start at the very beginning. Boosie Badaz, born Torrance Ivy Hatch Jr., grew up on the south side of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And when we say South Side Baton Rouge, We are not talking about a regular rough neighborhood. We are talking about a place so dangerous that Boosie himself has said in interviews that police used to refuse to even respond to calls in his area. His father was murdered over a drug deal gone wrong when Boosie was just 14 years old. He grew up with no father, no real guidance, surrounded by violence and poverty, and a street culture that made crime feel like the only way forward. He got expelled from school for drug possession. He turned to music as his escape, and through sheer talent and authenticity and grind, he became one of the most respected rappers the South has ever produced. He turned pain into art. He turned survival into a business. And when he went to prison and survived all of that and came home, he made a promise, whether publicly or privately, that his children were not going to live that life. That is the foundation of everything that makes Tootie Raw's story hit so hard. Because Boosie did not just talk about getting out, he actually got out. He moved his family, he built generational wealth. He said publicly for years that you have to go back to your hood and show love, but the hood is not where you lay your head. He made it clear that the whole point of grinding the way he ground was to make sure the next generation never had to grind the same way. And Tootie Raw was born August 6, 2003, right into that promise. Born into resources, born into a famous last name, born into a father who, for all his flaws, genuinely loves his children and has been vocal about that love in ways most public figures never are. But here is where it gets complicated, because Tootie did not grow up in a vacuum. He grew up in Baton Rouge. He grew up around the culture that made his father famous. He grew up hearing stories about the streets, watching his father's music videos, absorbing the mythology of everything his dad came from. And when you are surrounded by that, when the thing your father escaped is also the thing that made your father a legend, you develop a very confusing relationship with it. The streets that destroyed Boosie's childhood are also the streets that gave Boosie his identity, his credibility, his career, his relevance. That contradiction lives inside Tootie whether he is conscious of it or not, and it shapes the choices he has been making for years. Tootie started building his own music career around 2018, releasing his first single, It's Up, on YouTube and working to establish himself independently of his father's name. His debut album, Rack Baby, dropped in 2020 under Boosie's label. He dropped tracks like Trippin', Madman, Hold On, and Diamond Shining. He collaborated with other artists, built a following on Instagram, got YouTube subscribers. He was doing the work. He was putting himself out there. And when he and his sister, Eviona, who raps as Poison Ivy, collaborated on a track together, it felt like the beginning of something real. A family music dynasty in the making, built on talent rather than trauma. But here's where it gets real interesting, and this is something that does not get talked about enough when people discuss Tootie. The name Rack Baby is not an accident. The word rack is slang connected to street life, to trap culture, to the gritty reality of neighborhoods like the ones his father came from. And that title choice tells you something important about how Tootie has been positioning himself, not as Boosie's son who got to skip the hard part, but as someone who is also from that world, someone who earned his place in the culture the same way his father did. The problem is, he did not come from that world the same way his father did. He came from a different version of it, one where his father's money and name created a cushion that Boosie never had. And there is a very specific kind of pressure that comes with that cushion, because in rap culture, that cushion can actually be a liability. Being comfortable is not a flex. Having everything handed to you is not a story anyone wants to hear. And so you see young artists in Tootie's position making a calculated, or sometimes unconscious, decision to close the gap between their real life and the image the culture respects. And nowhere is that gap more visible than in Tootie's continued gravitating back toward the hood in Baton Rouge. This was not a one-time thing. This was a pattern. Boosie himself has gone on record multiple times, reacting to his son constantly going back to dangerous areas in Baton Rouge that they had already gotten away from. There is footage, there are Instagram lives, there are interviews, all of them showing a father who is confused, frustrated, and genuinely scared. He told his son directly, "We made it out the hood, why would you want to go back?" Think about how much weight those words carry coming from Boosie Badazz. This is a man who literally rapped about trying to make $1 million just to get out of Baton Rouge. This is a man who watched people he loved get swallowed by those streets, and he is watching his son voluntarily walk back into the same fire he spent his whole career trying to put out. But let's be real about why Tootie keeps going back, because it is not as simple as saying he is just making bad decisions. For young men who grow up adjacent to hood culture rather than fully in it, going back to the hood can actually feel like going home in a way that their more comfortable environments do not. It is where the energy is real. It is where people respond to you based on your actual presence, not your father's last name. It is where the street version of respect gets earned in ways that no Instagram follower count can replicate. And for a young rapper who is constantly fighting to be taken seriously on his own terms, not just as Boosie's son, the hood offers something that a label deal and a Jaguar cannot. The feeling of belonging. The feeling of being real, and that feeling, dangerous as it is incredibly hard to walk away from when your whole identity as an artist is built around it. Now let me talk about the trapping situation, because this is where things got really uncomfortable and really public. During an Instagram live that ended up going viral, Boosie called Tootie on the phone right there in front of his audience. He asked his son what he was doing, and Tootie told him he was trapping, just like that, out loud, on his father's live, and Boosie's reaction was immediate. He told Tootie he had a bag for him, that he did not need to do that. He told him to come home. He said the money was there, the support was there was nothing Tootie needed that he would not provide. And Tootie responded the way a young man who has decided his identity is tied to the streets responded. He said he was good. He said he was making money on his own. According to reports from that incident, Tootie was claiming to be pulling in serious daily money from his activities. And his father, who built everything from nothing, was sitting there on camera telling his son he did not need any of it. That moment right there is the entire story compressed into one phone call, because what Boosie was hearing was not just his son making money. What he was hearing was his son choosing a path that he personally knew the end of, a path that leads to prison, or worse. And Boosie knows what that path looks like because he lived it. He went to prison at the height of his career. He sat in a cell while his children grew up without their father present. He survived a murder charge. He came home with scars and with wisdom and with a very clear understanding of what the streets actually cost when the bill comes due. And all of that knowledge, all of that lived experience was sitting inside him on that Instagram live while his son told him he was out in Baton Rouge trapping and didn't need help. That had to hurt in a way that goes beyond words. And trapping was not the only thing worrying Boosie about his son. Around the same time period, Boosie started being very open about his concerns regarding Tootie's substance use. First, it was the weed, which Boosie addressed in a viral and honestly kind of funny Instagram live moment where he walked outside to find Tootie sitting in his car smoking first thing in the morning, so checked out that he did not even notice his father standing right next to the open car door. Boosie said that his son was going to turn into a weed plant, that everything revolved around smoking, that Tootie could not eat unless he was high. And in typical Boosie fashion, he admitted he was the same way at that age, so he could not fully talk. But the humor was covering something real, a father watching his son start down a road of substance dependence that he recognized from his own past. But the lean situation was much more serious, and Boosie made that clear. Lean, which is promethazine codeine cough syrup mixed with soda, is not casual. It is not like weed in terms of health consequences. Lean has been linked to respiratory failure, organ damage, and death. Rappers like Pimp C and others from the culture that Boosie himself came from have died connected to this substance. And when Boosie began speaking publicly about trying to get his son off lean, he said something that stopped a lot of people in their tracks. He said his son was just like he used to be. He saw his own past reflected in what Tootie was doing. He saw himself before the consequences hit, before the prison, before the reality checks. And the fact that he could look at his son and recognize that pattern so clearly and still feel powerless to fully stop it speaks to how deep this thing goes. Think about this from a purely human perspective for a second. Boosie has been through things that most people cannot even imagine. He watched his father get murdered. He built a career from poverty. He went to prison. He faced a murder charge. He got cancer. He survived all of it. And the one thing that is bringing him to his knees publicly is watching his son make choices that he does not have to make, for reasons that have nothing to do with survival and everything to do with image. That is a particular kind of pain that hits differently than anything the streets ever threw at Boosie directly. Now let's talk about the guns on the video shoot moment, because this became one of the most watched and discussed clips in hip-hop parenting history. Footage surfaced in September 2024 of Boosie Badazz and T.I. showing up unannounced to a music video shoot where their sons, Tootie Raw and King Harris, were filming while openly flaunting firearms. And both of these fathers, two men who have seen everything the industry and the streets have to offer, shut it down immediately. Boosie was frustrated and direct. He wanted to know why they always had to have guns. He asked why they couldn't make love music, why they couldn't talk about being in love, why they needed the violent imagery. And T.I. broke down the legal reality for them in very specific terms. He explained that if police rolled up on that set and started asking who those firearms belonged to, somebody was going to have to raise their hand. And that person was going to face charges that could end their career and their freedom at the same time. The footage went viral not just because it was dramatic, but because it was raw. Two legends who had lived the consequences of exactly this kind of moment, standing in front of their sons trying to stop history from repeating itself. But here's the thing about Tootie specifically in that situation that matters a lot. He is not a kid from the trenches who grew up having to carry a weapon to protect himself from daily threats in a neighborhood where danger was unavoidable. He is Boosie Badaz's son. He grew up with resources. He grew up with access. The guns on that set were not about survival. They were about image. They were about looking the part. And that distinction is critical because the consequences of carrying an illegal weapon do not care whether you are doing it because you have to or because you want to appear like you have to. The charges are the same either way. And that takes us straight to September 3rd, 2025, and the most serious moment yet in Tootie Raw's public story. Atlanta police arrested Torrance Taylor, Tootie Raw, on charges of unlawful possession of a firearm, specifically a machine gun, and obstruction of law enforcement officers. The firearm in question was reported to be a Glock handgun equipped with what is known as a switch, a small device that illegally converts a semi-automatic pistol into a fully automatic weapon capable of firing continuously with a single trigger pull. A Glock switch is not just a gun charge. It is a federal-level charge that carries serious mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. This is not a jaywalking ticket. This is the kind of charge that changes the trajectory of a life. And footage that circulated online showed Tootie running from police through a wooded area near Midtown Atlanta before being caught and handcuffed. He ran. He actually ran. Now let me give you the context around who else was involved in this story because it gets even more layered. A polarizing online personality named Charleston White, who has had a public and very bitter feud with Boosie for a long time, went on social media claiming he had tipped off police to Tootie's location in Atlanta, bragging that he had gotten him arrested within hours of him landing in the city. White claimed Tootie had been harassing and threatening him. Sources who spoke to media outlets under anonymity disputed White's claim of credit, saying police had already been monitoring the situation independently. But whether White played a role or not is almost beside the point, because the fact remains that Tootie showed up in Atlanta with what police say was an illegal weapon modification, and now he is facing federal-level gun charges as a 22-year-old young man whose father is a millionaire and who had every path available to him that did not involve any of this. And this is where you have to ask the harder question that most people in the comments are dancing around. Who was Tootie Raw carrying a Glock switch for? Who was he trying to impress? Because a switch is not a weapon modification you put on your gun because your environment demands it. A switch is a flex. In certain circles, in certain street cultures, having a switch is a status symbol. It says something about your willingness to go all the way. It says something about the image you want to project. And that image, that desperate, unnecessary, costly image, is at the core of everything that Tootie Raw's story has been building toward. He is not a hood kid trying to survive. He is a suburban kid with a famous father and every resource imaginable who keeps reaching for the aesthetic of the streets because somewhere along the way he decided that was who he needed to be. Let me be clear about something because I want to make sure we are being fair here. Calling Tootie a suburban kid is not an insult. It is not a diss. It is the reality of what his father built. Boosie Badaz worked himself to the bone so that his children could be suburban kids, so that his children could grow up in safer environments, go to school without fear, make music without having to prove their realness through criminal activity. Being the child of success is not a character flaw, but the culture around rap, particularly Southern trap rap, has created this toxic dynamic where having been given something feels like it disqualifies you from being taken seriously. And that toxic dynamic is what you see Tootie fighting against, not in a healthy way, but in the only way the culture around him has taught him, by performing danger, by performing struggle, by performing a version of street life that his father's success already bought him out of. And this brings us back to Boosie, and honestly, to one of the most painful ironies in this entire situation. Boosie Badaz built his entire career on authenticity. His music resonated because it was real. He rapped about things he actually lived. And his son grew up watching that authenticity get celebrated, watching fans worship it, watching the culture reward it. So it makes a tragic kind of sense that Tootie would try to build his own credibility on the same foundation. The problem is the foundation underneath him is completely different. Boosie was authentic because he had no choice but to be. Tootie performing authenticity from a position of privilege is something different entirely. And the culture can feel that difference, which is exactly why why people online have been questioning his choices so loudly, because the performance keeps getting caught. There is also something worth talking about when it comes to the feud energy that Tootie has been generating online. In 2023, Tootie publicly called out NBA YoungBoy for not clearing a feature they had worked on, going on live and making it very personal. He also went at Kodak Black after Kodak chose to work with 6699 instead of following through on a collaboration promise to Tootie. And the way Tootie handled both of those situations was not the way a music business professional handles a failed collaboration. It was the way a street dude handles being disrespected. He put people on blast, he made threats, he escalated. And Boosie, watching all of this, went on record saying he was scared, not annoyed. Scared. He said he worried every day about his son crashing out and ending up with a murder charge. He said the thing that kept him up at night was not just Tootie, but the people around Tootie, the friends who were always armed. Because that is how these situations unfold. You are not even the one who escalates, and you still end up holding the bag for someone else's moment. That fear from Boosie was not performative. It was a father who knew exactly how quickly things can shift when guns and young men and unresolved beef are in the same room. He knew because he lived it. He knew because some of the people he loved did not make it out, and he was watching the exact same ingredients pile up around his son in real time. Now, there is a broader conversation happening in hip-hop right now because of stories like Tootie's. The children of the culture's biggest names are coming of age, and a lot of them are making choices that are generating concern. King Harris is going through his own version of this. Lil Durk has spoken publicly about fears for his family. The pattern keeps showing up because the culture that made these fathers famous also follows their children and creates expectations that those children feel they have to meet. And meeting those expectations in the way the culture rewards them can get you killed. It can get you locked up. It can destroy in 2 years what took a generation to build. The lean conversation is a perfect example of this. Lean became a staple of Southern rap culture because the artists who made it famous, who sipped it on camera and rapped about it, were from an environment where that substance was part of the social fabric of life. It was not a fashion statement originally. It was embedded in the culture of a specific place and time. But when you are a young rapper trying to connect yourself to that culture, to signal that you belong, you adopt its symbols. You drink the lean, you carry the switch, you hang in the hood, you talk about trapping, and sometimes what started as a symbol becomes a reality. The lean that was a cultural signal becomes an actual dependency. The hood that was a place you visited to maintain credibility becomes a place that starts pulling you into real situations with real consequences. And by the time the line blurs, it can be very hard to find your way back. Boosie said something when he was speaking about trying to get his son off lean that I think is the most honest thing in this entire conversation. He said his son is just like he used to be, not as a compliment, as a warning, as a man who knows where that road leads because he walked it and paid every toll. He sees himself in Tootie not with pride, but with dread, because he knows what it costs. He knows what it takes to survive it. And he is not sure his son is going to be as lucky as he was. At the end of the day, Tootie Raw turning 22 is not just a birthday. It is a crossroads, and the road he has been on is documented. It is public. It is a pattern, going back to the hood in Baton Rouge. Trapping when his father has money for him, smoking weed from the moment he wakes up, drinking lean to fit in with the culture he idolizes, putting guns on music video sets while his own father tells him to stop, running from police in Atlanta with an illegal weapon modification that could put him away for years. Every one of those moments is a step deeper into a situation that his father has been publicly begging him to step back from. And the tragedy is not that Boosie failed as a father. The tragedy is that love is not always enough when the culture a person has built their identity around is pulling harder than the love is. 22 years old is young. People have come back from worse. His father is the living proof of that. But coming back requires a decision, a real one. Not one made for social media or to satisfy a father's fear, but one made because you understand what is actually at stake. Whether Tootie is at that point, whether the arrests and the close calls and his father's public fear have shaken him enough to look in the mirror and ask who he is really trying to be and why. That is the question that only Tootie can answer. And a lot of people who have been following this story, including the ones who have been the hardest on him, are genuinely hoping the answer comes before it is too late. What do y'all think about Tootie Raw's situation and the pressure celebrity kids face in this culture to prove themselves in ways they don't need to? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tap in with the content on screen for more stories like this one. Lil RT is finally growing up, and real talk, his story is way more sad than most of y'all think. Y'all remember this kid, the one who seemed to come out of nowhere, freestyling on an Atlanta street corner, and within months he was everywhere. Your timeline, your group chat, your little cousin's TikTok page. He went from a regular 9-year-old to a name millions of people knew, almost overnight. But here's the thing, what looked like a fairy tale come up from the outside was a lot more complicated once you start digging into what was actually happening around him. Years later, people are still asking the same question. Did growing up in front of millions actually help this kid? Or did the life that came with that early fame create problems that nobody fully understood at the time? Because what happened after the viral moments, after the cameras, after the headlines, that's the part of this story that really changed how people look at him. And we're about to get into all of it. The come up, the family, the heartbreak, and what this whole thing says about what we do to kids when we hand them a spotlight before they're even old enough to understand what it means. So stick around, because by the end of this, you're gonna see Lil RT a whole lot different than you did when you clicked on this video. Yo, what's good, fam? Before we get into the deep stuff, let me keep it 100 with y'all. There's a lot of noise out there about this kid. Rumors, hot takes, comment section debates that go in circles. But we about to separate the facts from the speculation and lay out exactly how this story unfolded so y'all can come to your own conclusions instead of just repeating what you saw on a 30-second clip. Let's go back to the beginning, because to understand where Lil RT is now, you gotta understand where he came from. Born Robert Thompson in June of 2014, this kid grew up in the West Atlanta neighborhood of Bankhead. Now, for those who don't know, Bankhead isn't just a location, it's a whole culture. It's a neighborhood with deep roots in Atlanta hip-hop, a place that's produced sounds and styles that ended up shaping mainstream rap for decades. Long before streaming numbers and viral clips, Bankhead was already known as a breeding ground for artists who turned their block parties, their everyday language into something the rest of the country would eventually pick up and run with. So from the jump, Lil RT wasn't some kid who discovered rap because it looked cool online. He was raised inside of it. The rhythm, the slang, the energy of the streets around him, that was just normal life before it ever became content. He lived with his mother, and he's got an older brother who goes by the rap name PCF Lil Kari. Music was already in the air around that household, and like a lot of kids who grow up around older siblings already chasing something, RT started imitating it early, real early. Before he could even fully form complete sentences the way most kids his age would, he was already messing with rhythm and flow. That's not an exaggeration for the sake of a good story, that's just how those who knew him early on describe it. He had an ear for it before most kids his age even understood what rap was. And that's worth sitting with for a second, fam, because most of us think of musical talent as something that gets discovered later, in a school talent show or a church choir. For RT, it wasn't discovered, it was just there from the start, baked into the environment he was born into. So check it, by the time he's 8-9 years old, he's not just playing around in the house anymore. He starts stepping up next to grown rappers, freestyling alongside dudes years older than him, and shocking people who watched it happen. Imagine being that young and already comfortable enough to grab a mic next to an adult and hold your own. That's wild when you think about it. Most 9-year-olds are worried about recess. This kid is worried about his bars. Now here's where the story really takes off. He starts posting freestyle videos on TikTok, just raw clips of him rapping on the block, and one of those videos catches fire. It spreads fast the way internet content does when it hits that perfect mix of shock value and raw talent. People are stopping mid-scroll like, wait, how old is this kid? Then in October of 2023, he drops his debut single, 60 Miles, alongside an artist named Batman J. That track is the one that changes everything. It blows up on YouTube, racking up millions of views in just a matter of months. The song leans into street life themes, urban struggle, the kind of subject matter you'd expect from a grown artist with years of life behind him, not a kid who hadn't even hit double digits for very long, and that's exactly where the conversation starts to split. Because on one side, you got people hyped, calling him a prodigy, comparing his confidence and flow to artists twice his age. But on the other side, you got a wave of concern, and it's coming from all directions. Parents, commentators, even other artists in the industry start asking the same question. Should a child this young be putting out music with this kind of content? Now in the streets, we know certain things. Talking about struggle, about the realities people live through, that's part of the tradition of hip-hop. It's storytelling rooted in real experience. But RT's situation hit different because he wasn't a grown man reflecting on a life he'd already lived. He was a literal child, still in elementary school, performing material that read like it came from someone twice his age. And that contrast, that gap between the maturity of the content and the age of the kid delivering it, that's what made this story blow up beyond just music blogs. It became a national conversation, the kind that pulled in people who'd never even heard of underground Atlanta rap before, just because the headline alone was enough to stop somebody mid-scroll. It wasn't just the music either. In November of 2023, Lil RT appeared on a live stream with popular Twitch streamer Kai Cenat. And during that stream, he delivered a freestyle that included a line that immediately set off alarm bells, language way too explicit and disturbing for a kid his age to even be saying out loud, let alone on a stream with that many eyes on it. Cenat reacted in the moment by pretending to take off his belt like he was about to discipline him, which only added more fuel to an already uncomfortable situation. Both of them caught heavy criticism for it afterward. Cenat later tried to walk it back, asking RT on stream if he'd actually said a different, far less troubling word instead, and RT went along with that explanation. But by then, the clip was already circulating everywhere, and it became one of the first moments where people who'd never paid attention to Lil RT before suddenly knew exactly who he was, and not for a good reason. He didn't stop at one song either. He follows up with 60 Miles 2, then 60 Miles 3, featuring Doughboy, and at this point the algorithm is doing what it does, pushing this kid into more and more feeds. He starts linking up with established names, dropping Big Dog Shawty with New York rapper Lil Mabu in March of 2024. For an underground artist, those kind of collaborations are a real cosign. It told people in the industry, this isn't just a viral fluke. People are taking this kid serious as an artist. But the real kicker though, the faster he climbed, the louder the criticism around him got. Because it's one thing to be a talented kid making noise online. It's another thing entirely once you start getting booked for actual performances in actual adult spaces. And that's exactly what happened in February of 2024 when Lil RT performed at a party out in Miami's Little River neighborhood. Now, this wasn't some school talent show or a clean YouTube short. Reports from that night described dancers twerking on him during the performance, along with the presence of an adult content creator at the event. Let that sink in for a minute. A child performing in an environment built for a grown audience, surrounded by adult entertainment. Conservative commentator Candace Owens didn't hold back when she spoke on it, calling it an example of what she described as sinister and evil people trying to corrupt the culture around children. She'd already been vocal before that night too, saying his lyrics reflected what she called the corrosion of the culture. On the other side of that debate, you had voices from inside the Atlanta rap scene pushing back. Fellow West Atlanta rapper Lil Tony defended him on a podcast, basically saying this is just where he's from, this is the environment that shaped him, and you can't really blame the kid for the world he was born into. So now you got two completely different lenses people are viewing this through. Some see exploitation, others see a kid being authentic to his environment, just doing what artists from his neighborhood have always done, except now with a global audience watching every move. And that disagreement, that's not something that got resolved, it just kept building. Especially once his birthday rolled around a few months later. In June of 2024, footage from Lil RT's 10th birthday party hit social media, and it spread fast for all the wrong reasons. The video showed adult women dancing on him during the celebration. Now fam, a 10th birthday is supposed to be cake, balloons, maybe a bounce house. Instead, the internet is watching a clip that sparked outrage from people across completely different political and cultural backgrounds, all landing on the same point, that this wasn't normal, and that something about the environment surrounding this kid needed to be questioned. That clip became one of those moments where even people who defended him before started going quiet, because there's a difference between defending an artist's content and watching footage like that play out in real time. Now let's shift gears, because this is where we got to address the part of his story that goes way deeper than internet drama or controversial performances. This is where it gets real. In November of 2024, Lil RT's family was hit with something no viral moment, no song, no collaboration could ever prepare them for. His older brother, who performed under the name PCF Lil Kari, was involved in a shooting near the Atlanta University Center. He was critically injured, and according to multiple reports, he later passed away from those injuries. Now, we're not going to sit here and dramatize details we can't confirm, because honestly, that's not what matters most in moments like this. What matters is what a loss like that actually does to a family, and especially to a child who's still trying to figure out who he is while the whole world is watching him do it. Think about that for a second. This is a kid who, just months earlier, was getting clowned and praised in the same breath for songs and performances. Now he's dealing with the kind of loss that breaks grown men. Losing a sibling, someone he grew up next to, someone who was part of the music journey with him in some way. That's not something a viral moment can prepare you for. That's not industry pressure. That's not internet criticism. That's real, permanent, life-altering pain. And for a kid that young, processing grief like that while still being a public figure, while still having a camera somewhere pointed at parts of his life, that's something most of us can't even imagine carrying. Most people who experience a loss like that get to grieve privately. They get to fall apart in their own home, surrounded by people who love them, without strangers online dissecting their every move or turning their pain into commentary. That privacy is something Lil RT didn't really get to have, at least not fully. Even in the middle of something this personal, this devastating, there were still people online speculating, still content getting made, still headlines circulating. That's part of what makes child fame so different from anything else. The line between public life and private life basically disappears, and even the worst moments a family goes through can end up filtered through an audience that never knew the person being lost. Situations like that change how a person sees the world, especially a child. It can shift how someone views safety, how they understand the streets they grew up around, how they think about success, and whether any amount of fame or money is actually worth what it costs. A loss like that doesn't just create sadness, it creates perspective, the kind of perspective most people don't get until they're a lot older, if ever. And that's part of why this story is so much heavier than people realize when they first hear the name Lil RT and think it's just about a kid who can rap. Now, this next part we got to handle carefully because a lot of what's out here is speculation, online debate, and people forming opinions based on clips rather than full context. But it's a conversation that's followed Lil RT since day one, so we're not going to skip past it. And that's the conversation around his mother and the role she's played in his career. From the jump, Lil RT's mother has been the one managing his social media presence, accompanying him to performances, and handling a lot of the public-facing side of his career. And once 60 Miles took off, people online started asking questions. Was she simply trying to support her son's talent and give him opportunities most kids never get? Or was the speed of his rise and the way his image was being used creating pressure that primarily benefited the adults around him rather than the child himself? You see both sides argued heavily across comment sections and reaction videos. On one side, plenty of people online pushed back on the criticism entirely, saying family members stepping in to manage a young talent isn't unusual, and that outsiders judging from the comfort of their own circumstances don't always understand the full picture of what that family might be navigating. On the other side, you had a wave of public concern, including from commentators like Candace Owens, who said her heart broke for the child because she felt his guardians weren't steering him toward a healthier path. Critics pointed to the explicit content in his music, the adult environments he was being placed in for performances, and that birthday party footage, asking the same hard question over and over. At what point does supporting a child's talent cross into exposing that child to situations no kid should be in? Was the pace of his rise about nurturing a genuine gift? Or was it about capitalizing on a viral moment as fast as possible before it faded? This is where you start to see something bigger than just one family situation. Because when a young artist goes viral the way Lil RT did, the internet doesn't just focus on the kid, it zooms in on everyone around him. Parents, managers, anyone connected to the brand becomes part of the story, part of the debate, sometimes fairly, sometimes not. People form entire narratives off of a few video clips without knowing the daily reality of that household, the conversations happening behind closed doors, or the actual intentions driving the decisions being made. That's the nature of viral fame. It moves faster than the truth can keep up with, and the people closest to the artist often get caught in a narrative they didn't fully create and can't fully control. And look, there's no clean answer here. Both sides of that debate raise legitimate points. Supporting a child's talent isn't inherently wrong. Plenty of young athletes, actors, and musicians have parents deeply involved in managing their early careers, and many of them turn out fine, grateful even, for the doors that got open. But the conversation around child fame in the entertainment industry isn't new either. And history has shown that without the right boundaries, without protecting a kid's actual childhood underneath all that exposure, things can go sideways in ways that take years to fully understand. So when it comes to Lil RT's mother and her role in his rise, the most honest thing we can say is this. It's a debate. It's public perception clashing with private reality. And outside of that household, none of us can say with certainty what the true intentions or daily dynamics actually were. What we can say is that the questions being asked about pressure, about pacing, about who actually benefits when a child goes viral, those are questions worth asking anytime a kid is thrust into this kind of spotlight, regardless of the specific family involved. Now let's zoom out for a second, because Lil RT's story isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of a much bigger pattern we keep seeing play out with young creators across social media. A kid posts something, it catches fire, and within weeks their entire life shifts. Expectations form overnight. Brands want to work with them. Other artists want collaborations. Fans expect new content constantly, and if that content slows down, those same fans start asking what happened. Why'd they fall off? That cycle puts pressure on a young person that even adults in the industry struggle to handle, let alone someone who's still learning long division at school. We've seen versions of this play out across every corner of the internet, not just music. Child gamers who blew up streaming, kid influencers whose entire childhood got turned into a brand, young athletes whose highlight clips went viral before they even hit puberty. Every single time, the pattern looks similar. The internet falls in love with the novelty of it. A kid doing something at a level nobody expects, and that novelty gets monetized fast, sometimes faster than anyone around that child can fully think through the long-term consequences. Nobody's necessarily acting with bad intentions in these situations, but speed and good judgment don't always move at the same pace, and kids end up living out the result of decisions made in the middle of a viral storm. And here's the thing, fam, the public's relationship with young viral stars is never static. It shifts constantly. In the beginning, people are hyped, sharing the clips, defending the kid in the comments, calling them the future of the culture. But the moment controversy hits, that same crowd can flip just as fast, turning into the loudest critics, picking apart every decision made by the people around that child. Then time passes, the initial wave of attention fades, and what's left is the actual human being who has to live with everything that happened during that whirlwind. The views go down, the headlines stop, but the kid is still there, still growing, still trying to figure out who they are outside of the persona that got built around them during those viral months. Years from now, long after this specific story stops trending, that's still the person who has to wake up and live inside of everything that happened, whether the internet is paying attention anymore or not. That's really the question hanging over Lil RT's story right now. What happens after the moment fades? Because right now, he's still young, still in school, still figuring out who he is day to day, but he's already lived through more public scrutiny, more controversy, and more real personal loss than most adults experience in decades. He's been praised as a prodigy and criticized as a cautionary tale, sometimes within the same week. He's collaborated with respected names in the industry, performed in front of crowds most adult artists would be nervous to step in front of, and at the same time dealt with grief that no amount of views or followers could ever soften. So where does that leave him right now, going into this year? As of 2026, Lil RT is 12 years old. He's still active online, still posting, still has a fan base that's stuck around since those early viral days. But the picture looks a lot different than it did back when 60 Miles was blowing up every feed in sight. There's no major tour on the books, no string of festival dates, none of the non-stop scheduling people might expect for an artist who once looked like he was about to take over the culture overnight. The pace has slowed, and whether that's by choice, by circumstance, or just the natural way viral moments fade as the internet moves on to the next thing, that's not something outsiders can say for certain. What fans have noticed is a kid who's simply older now. Not grown, not transformed into some finished version of himself, just older. The way any 12-year-old looks different than the 9-year-old freestyling on a street corner a few years back. His page is still run by his mother, still handling bookings and features the way it always has. Some fans say they can hear it in his more recent material, a difference in tone, in subject matter, like he's working through more than he used to. Others say it's hard to tell from the outside how much has actually changed versus how much people just want to believe changed, because watching a kid grow up online makes you root for a redemption arc whether one's actually happening or not. And that's the honest place to leave it. The lifestyle a lot of people projected onto him early on, the assumption that viral fame at 9 would turn into stadium tours and a fully built career by his early teens, that hasn't played out the way some expected. What's left instead is a kid who's still here, still posting, still carrying everything that happened to him these last few years without the spotlight burning quite as bright as it once did. Some longtime fans have stuck around through all of it, still commenting, still checking in on him, treating him less like a viral novelty now and more like someone they've actually watched grow up. Others moved on entirely the way the the internet always does, chasing whatever the next big moment happens to be, whether this current stretch is a quieter chapter or just the calm before something else. Nobody outside that household really knows. At the end of the day, Lil RT's story isn't just about a kid who can rap or a viral moment that turned into a career. It's about what happens when a child gets pushed into an adult spotlight before they're old enough to understand what that spotlight actually costs. It's about the pressure that builds quietly behind the scenes, pressure that doesn't always show up in a 30-second clip or a comment section debate. It's about a family trying to navigate opportunity and protection at the same time, and about a community split on whether what's happening is empowerment or exploitation. And it's about real loss, the kind that doesn't care how many views your last song got, the kind that reshapes how a person sees the world for the rest of their life. Growing up in front of millions sounds like a dream to a lot of people watching from the outside. But real talk, fam, the pressure that comes with that kind of exposure, the expectations, the criticism, the loss of a normal childhood, that's something most audiences never fully see. They see the clips, the numbers, the headlines. They don't see what it's actually like to carry all of that as a kid who's still trying to grow up. They don't see the nights where a child has to process grief while also reading comments from strangers about whether they're being exploited. They don't see what it's like to have your 10th birthday party turned into a national debate or your freestyle turned into a controversy you didn't fully understand the weight of in the moment. All they see is the highlight reel, and highlight reels were never built to show the full picture of anybody's life, especially not a child's. That's the part of this story that deserves more attention than it usually gets. Not the controversy, not the viral clips, not even the music itself, but the simple fact that underneath all of it is a kid, still trying to figure out who he is, still trying to grow up the way every other kid his age deserves to, except he's doing it with millions of strangers watching every step. So the real question now is what comes next for Lil RT? Does he get the chance to actually process everything he's been through, to grow into himself away from constant public judgment? Or does the internet keep treating his life like content, moving on to the next viral kid the second this story stops trending? That's not something any of us can answer for him, but it's something worth sitting with the next time a video like this shows up on your feed. What are your thoughts on Lil RT's journey and what this whole situation says about fame, family, and childhood in the social media age? Drop your thoughts down in the comments, and if you want to go deeper into stories like this one, check out the videos on screen right now for more. Takeoff's mother is now publicly exposing his father for allegedly trying to get his hands on $26 million from an estate he had absolutely no part in building. And the legal battle that has erupted inside this family since Takeoff's death is one of the most shocking stories the hip-hop world has had to sit with. A woman who raised her son alone, who was there through every year of struggle before the fame and the money arrived, is now standing in a courtroom fighting off a man who reportedly was nowhere to be found during those years, but showed up the moment there was a fortune on the table. We have been watching this story closely, and what we can tell you is that the details go far deeper than what has been circulating on social media. The legal filings, the competing claims, the history between these two parents and their son, it all connects in ways that most people have not fully pieced together yet. And today we are laying out the entire picture for you. Because the truth behind what Takeoff's father is allegedly trying to pull, what his mother is doing to stop it, and what is actually at stake inside that $26 million estate is more disturbing than the headline suggests. And by the time this video is done, you are going to understand exactly how all of it went down. Yo, what is good, fam? Welcome back. If you are new here, this is where we break down the stories that matter to the culture. The real ones, the deep ones, the ones with layers that a tweet cannot capture. Today we are getting into the full story of Takeoff, his legacy, his fortune, and the family war that has broken out over everything he left behind. Let's get into it. Yo, what is good, fam? Welcome back. Today we are getting into the story of Kurznik Khari Ball, the man the world knew as Takeoff, 1/3 of Migos, one of the most technically gifted rappers of his generation, and a man who left behind a legacy and a fortune that is now at the center of a family battle that nobody saw coming. Let's start from the beginning, because the money does not make sense without the story, and the story does not make sense without understanding who this man really was. Takeoff was born on June 18, 1994 in Lawrenceville, Georgia, a suburb of Atlanta in Gwinnett County. He grew up in a household that included his uncle Quavius Marshall, who the world came to know as Quavo, and his cousin Kiari Cephas, better known as Offset, 3 young men from the same family tree, raised together, grinding together, dreaming together. And Takeoff was raised primarily by his mother, Titania Davenport. That is important. That is a detail we are going to come back to, because the story of who raised Takeoff, who was there during the years when nothing was guaranteed, is directly connected to everything happening in courtrooms right now. By middle school, Takeoff was already developing a feel for rhythm and music that was different from the kids around him. He was not the loudest person in the room, he was never the most talkative. But when it came to putting words together and riding a beat, he had something special that the people around him recognized early. In 2008, when Takeoff was just 14 years old, he and Quavo and Offset formed a group they initially called the Polo Club. They were teenagers with energy and ambition and a sound that was still raw but already their own. They renamed themselves Migos around 2010 and in August of 2011 released their first mixtape, Juke Season. It was not an overnight success. There was no viral moment that handed them everything. It was years of putting out projects, building a street reputation in Atlanta, and refusing to quit even when the industry was not paying attention. The breakthrough moment that started turning heads on a wider scale came in 2013 with the release of a single called Versace. That record, built on a hypnotic loop and delivered in the triplet flow cadence that would become Migos' signature sound, caught the attention of Drake. Drake jumped on the remix, and suddenly a record that was already moving in the culture went to an entirely different level. For people who were not deep in Atlanta rap at the time, Versace was the introduction to something that felt unlike anything else on radio or in the streaming landscape, that triplet flow. The staccato bouncing delivery where syllables are stacked in tight 3-note bursts was not invented by Migos, but they perfected it, popularized it, and made it the dominant vocal pattern of an entire era of hip-hop. Artists across every corner of rap eventually adopted some version of it. Producers started building beats designed for it, and it all traces back to 3 young men from Gwinnett County who were not supposed to make it by anyone's early estimation. Their debut studio album, Young Rich Nation, dropped in July of 2015. Then came the record that changed everything. In January of 2017, Migos released Culture, and it debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. The lead single was Bad and Boujee featuring Lil Uzi Vert, and that song went to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was everywhere. It became a cultural phenomenon almost immediately. Memed into infinity, referenced on television, quoted by celebrities, played at every party, in every city, on every playlist. Bad and Boujee went on to be certified 4 times platinum and became one of the defining records of that entire moment in popular music. Culture was followed by Culture 2 in January 2018 and Culture 3 in June 2021, cementing Migos as one of the most consistent and commercially dominant groups hip-hop had seen in years. But within the group, the real fans always had a particular appreciation for Takeoff. He was the quiet one, the understated one. He rarely dominated interviews, rarely courted controversy, rarely made himself the center of attention outside of his music. But on the records, on the actual songs, Takeoff was frequently the one whose verse made people rewind. His technical precision, his sense of timing, his ability to lock into a flow and sustain it with consistency and creativity. These were qualities that set him apart even within a group of 3 genuinely talented artists. There was a running conversation in hip-hop circles about Takeoff being the most slept-on member of Migos despite being arguably the most technically skilled. And Takeoff himself was aware of that dynamic. In an interview on the Drink Champs podcast recorded just days before his death, he said something that has haunted the culture ever since. He said he wanted his flowers while he was still here. He did not want to wait for people to celebrate him after he was gone. Those words hit different now in a way that is almost impossible to sit with. In 2018, Takeoff also proved he could stand alone when he released his debut solo album, The Last Rocket. That project debuted at #4 on the Billboard 200 and was celebrated by fans and critics as the clearest demonstration yet of what Takeoff could do without the group framework. He and Quavo later recorded together as a duo called Unk and Few, expanding further and showing that there was more runway ahead for both of them individually. Takeoff's trajectory was still going up, there was more music coming, more chapters to be written. And then on November 1st, 2022, at 810 Billiards and Bowling in Houston, Texas, Takeoff was shot and killed. He was 28 years old.
Breaking news out of Texas, where a member of the rap group Migos was fatally shot. What we are hearing is that it was 28-year-old Takeoff who was shot at a private party. This all happening at a bowling alley. We do have some video of the scene, and then the rapper was shot. We're hearing that he may have been shot in his head or near his head. He was actually pronounced dead on the scene.
The music industry went quiet with grief. Artists from Drake to Eazy-A to Machine Gun Kelly paid tribute publicly. His funeral was held at Atlanta's State Farm Arena, a massive venue filled with family, friends, fans, and fellow artists who came to say goodbye to someone the culture was not ready to lose. A man who had asked for his flowers while he was here and who deserved every single one of them. Now let's talk about the money, because this is where the story shifts and becomes the situation we are all watching right now. At the time of his passing, Takeoff had an estimated net worth of approximately $26 million. That figure has been widely reported across multiple outlets and is the number that has been referenced in the legal proceedings surrounding his estate. To understand why that number exists and what it actually represents, you have to understand how wealth gets built at the level Migos was operating. The biggest single source of income for Migos during their peak years was touring. Between September 2017 and September 2018, Migos earned a combined $25 million, generated largely by a schedule that had them performing 93 shows in 12 months. That same period included the Aubrey and the Three Migos tour with Drake, which grossed over $103 million across 54 shows. By this point, according to Forbes, Migos was commanding upwards of $150,000 per tour stop. When you consider that they were performing nearly twice a week for an entire year, the math becomes staggering. Between September 2018 and September 2019, the group's earnings climbed further to $36 million. 2 years, $61 million combined. Assuming the members split earnings roughly equally, each one of them was taking home somewhere in the range of $20 million across just those 2 years. Then there is streaming. Migos was one of the most streamed acts on the planet during their peak. In that same 2017 to 2018 period, they accumulated 4 billion streams. 4 billion. The per-stream rate on platforms like Spotify and Apple Music is small when you look at it individually. But when you are stacking 4 billion streams in a single year, the royalty income becomes enormous, and it keeps coming every single month as long as people keep listening, and people keep listening. Bad and Boujee, T-Shirt, Walk It, Talk It, Motorsport, Stir Fry. These are not songs that disappeared from playlists. They are catalog staples that generate ongoing income continuously. On top of touring and streaming, Migos built significant income through brand endorsements and partnerships. Beats by Dr. Mountain Dew, Champs Sports, Finish Line, Avian Jewelers, and a management deal structure that, after they left 300 Entertainment in 2015 to move exclusively under Quality Control Music, significantly increased their per-show earnings from around $30,000 to $40,000 a night to upwards of $60,000 and eventually the $150,000 figure that Forbes reported. Takeoff also personally launched an NFT collection called Apes in Space that sold out 10,000 units within a single week. The man was not just earning, he was building. But here is the thing that most people outside of the music business do not fully appreciate, and this is crucial for understanding why the estate dispute is as serious as it is. The most valuable thing Takeoff left behind is not cash sitting in a bank account. It is his music catalog, his share of the master recordings, his publishing rights, his stake in the Migos collective output, and his solo work. These are assets that do not expire. Every single time a Migos song is streamed anywhere in the world, royalties are generated. Every time Bad and Boujee gets licensed for a film, a television show, a commercial, or a video game, a synchronization fee is paid to the estate. Every time a song is played on radio or in a public venue, performance rights royalties are collected. This income does not stop because the artist passed away. In many cases, tragically, it actually increases after a beloved artist dies because of the surge in streaming that always follows. Takeoff's catalog is a financial engine that will keep running for decades. Whoever controls that estate controls the engine. And that is exactly what is now at the center of this legal battle. So now let's get into it. The actual situation, the reason this video exists. When Takeoff died on November 1st, 2022, he died intestate. That is the legal term for dying without a will. No documented instructions for how his assets should be distributed. No named beneficiaries, no executor designated to manage the estate, nothing. At 28 years old, with $26 million built and a music catalog worth far more over time, Takeoff left no legal roadmap for what should happen to any of it after he was gone. And in the absence of that roadmap, the state of Georgia stepped in with its own rules. Under Georgia's interstate succession law, when a person dies without a will, without a spouse, and without children, the estate passes to the next of kin. In Takeoff's case, that means his parents, his mother, Titania Davenport, and his biological father, Kenneth M. Ball. That is where this story begins to get complicated. Titania Davenport, Takeoff's mother, the woman who raised him, moved to take legal action in connection with her son's estate and his death. In June of 2023, she filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the owners of 810 Billiards and Bowling, the venue where Takeoff was shot and killed. The lawsuit alleged that the venue's owners failed to provide proper and adequate security for the event that night. It claimed there were no screening mechanisms at the door, no after-hour controls or security measures, and no enforcement of rules or industry standards to protect the guests at that event. The lawsuit further alleged that the venue's owners knew or should have known about a significant number of violent crimes that had occurred in and around that location, and that they failed to take reasonable action in response to that known risk. Titania Davenport was seeking more than $1 million in damages from the venue and the various LLCs connected to its ownership and management. That lawsuit on its own is a significant legal undertaking representing a mother's attempt to hold accountable the people she believes failed to protect her son the night he was killed. But then Kenneth Ball entered the picture, and that is where this entire situation became what it is today. According to reporting from All Hip Hop, Bossip, Hip Hop DX, and Complex, among other outlets that track the legal filings, Takeoff's father, Kenneth M. Ball, moved to join the wrongful death lawsuit as a third-party intervener. In legal terms, an intervener is someone who is not directly named in an existing lawsuit but who claims a personal stake in the outcome and seeks to formally join the proceedings. Ball's legal team argued that he too had suffered substantial pecuniary loss as a result of his son's death. His attorneys were quoted saying that Kenneth Ball, as the natural parent of Takeoff, had suffered substantial past and future pecuniary loss, including funeral and burial expenses, psychological and psychiatric expenses, loss of advice, loss of counsel, loss of services, loss of care, loss of maintenance, and loss of support. Ball reportedly sought at least $1 million in damages from the bowling alley as well, mirroring the amount his mother had already claimed. And this is exactly the moment where Takeoff's mother drew the line, because from where she is standing, and from where a lot of people in the culture are standing alongside her, this is not a grieving father stepping forward to seek justice for his son. This is someone attempting to collect from a legacy he was not present for, a man who reportedly was nowhere to be found during the years of struggle, during the years of grinding, during the years when Titania Davenport was holding things together on her own, and who is now showing up in a courtroom with attorneys and legal filings the moment $26 million entered the conversation. Takeoff's mother is reportedly making sure the world understands exactly what she believes is happening here. She is not staying quiet. She is not letting the narrative be controlled by legal language and procedural filings alone. In the eyes of the people closest to Takeoff, what his father is doing has a name. And that name is not grief. That name is opportunism. And Titania Davenport, by all accounts, is fighting back. And fam, here is the thing that has the culture reacting the way it has been reacting. Multiple reports, from The Source, from Hip Hop Wired, from Madame Noir, from outlets that have been covering this situation closely, have highlighted that there are competing and conflicting accounts of what Kenneth Ball's actual involvement in Takeoff's life looked like during the years when Takeoff was growing up and grinding. By multiple documented accounts, Takeoff was raised primarily in a single-parent household by his mother. Some sources have indicated that Takeoff himself acknowledged being mainly raised by his mother, with the broader family unit, including Quavo's side of the family, serving as the primary support structure during his formative years. Both sides are reportedly contesting the question of just how actively involved Ball was in his son's life before the money arrived. And that question, the question of who was there during the hard years, is not just emotional, it is legally relevant in the context of who should benefit from the legacy that was built during those hard years. Under Georgia law, the biological connection is what establishes inheritance rights in an intestate situation. The courts are not typically in the business of weighing whether a parent was emotionally present or financially supportive when determining who is a legal next of kin. The law looks at biology, at documentation, at statutory definitions of family relationship, and that creates the core tension at the heart of this story. What feels morally right and what the law says is legally permissible are not always the same thing. Titania Davenport raised this man, she was there. By all accounts, she sacrificed and invested and believed in her son before anyone else did. But under George's intestate succession framework, Kenneth Ball's biological claim to a portion of that estate exists regardless of the personal history between him and his son. The exact division of the $26 million estate and the ongoing royalty income from the music catalog has reportedly not been finalized. What has been reported is that both parents are actively involved in legal proceedings connected to the estate, that the situation between them is contentious and complicated by a reportedly long-standing breakdown in their relationship, and that the question of who controls and benefits from everything Takeoff left behind remains an ongoing legal matter. The bowling alley's owners, for their part, have pushed back on the wrongful death claims, with their legal team reportedly moving to dismiss the suit and attributing responsibility to the event attendees rather than the venue itself. Now let me take a step back for a second and give you the broader context here, because what is happening with Takeoff's estate is not unique to his story. It is part of a pattern that keeps repeating in the music industry and has been repeating for decades. When a major artist dies without a will, the legal and financial aftermath is almost always complicated, expensive, and drawn out. Prince died in 2016 without a will despite being worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and the legal proceedings over his estate dragged on for years, consuming enormous resources in attorney fees and court costs while his catalog sat in a kind of financial limbo. Aretha Franklin died in 2018 without a formal will, and her family spent years in court working through competing claims and handwritten documents that may or may not have constituted legal instructions. Even Nipsey Hussle, who was famously outspoken about financial literacy and generational wealth building, had estate complications arise after his death in 2019 despite having done more legal preparation than many artists at his level. The point is that estate disputes in the music industry are almost expected when a young, high-earning artist passes suddenly without the legal infrastructure to govern the transition of their wealth. And the music industry specifically creates a kind of financial complexity that most other industries do not. When a tech entrepreneur or a business owner passes away, the assets are largely fixed. Company equity, real estate, cash accounts, investment portfolios. You can look at them, assess them, divide them with relative clarity. When a musician passes away, the most valuable assets are living, breathing income streams that are constantly generating revenue and constantly fluctuating in value based on cultural relevance, licensing activity, streaming trends, and market conditions. The music catalog is not a static pile of money. It is a dynamic business that requires active management, legal oversight, and strategic decision-making. Someone has to approve licensing deals. Someone has to negotiate with streaming platforms. Someone has to decide whether to release archival material or collaborate with other artists on posthumous projects. These decisions have enormous financial implications, and they require someone with both the legal authority and the right judgment to make them well. That is precisely why control of the estate, not just a share of the money, but the actual administrative authority over how the estate is managed, is so fiercely contested. Because whoever sits in that seat is not just receiving royalty checks. They are steering the ship. They are making decisions that will shape how Takeoff's name and music are presented to the world for decades to come. And for Titania Davenport, who raised her son and watched him build his entire legacy, the idea of someone else sitting in that seat, especially someone whose presence during her son's lifetime is itself disputed, is reportedly something she is not willing to accept without a fight. Fans online have been very vocal about where they stand. In comment sections and on social media, the sentiment has largely leaned toward Titania Davenport, toward the mother who was there. People have pointed out the irony and the pain of a father who reportedly was not a consistent presence during Takeoff's life now stepping forward when there is $26 million and a music catalog on the table. Others have noted more dispassionately that regardless of the emotional dimension of the situation, the legal framework is what it is, and that is the arena where this will ultimately be resolved. Both of those perspectives reflect something true. The emotional truth of this story and the legal reality of this story are two different things, and they are not always aligned. What this situation also highlights, in a way that cuts across the specific details of this family's experience, is the critical importance of estate planning for anyone who is building serious wealth. Takeoff was 28 when he died. At 28, most people are not spending their evenings working with estate attorneys on wills and trusts and beneficiary designations. But Takeoff was not most people. By the time he was in his mid-20s, he had earned more money than the vast majority of people will see in an entire lifetime. He had a music catalog generating continuous income. He had publishing rights and royalty streams and business interests. All of that needed a legal home, a set of documented instructions that would govern what happened to it when he was no longer here to manage it. The absence of that documentation is what created the opening for the legal battle that is now unfolding. Music industry attorneys and financial advisors who speak publicly about these issues are consistent in their advice. A will alone is not always sufficient for artists at this level. What is typically recommended is a comprehensive estate plan that includes a will, yes, but also trusts designed to manage ongoing income, clearly designated beneficiaries for specific assets, a named executor or administrator who understands the music business, and updated beneficiary designations on all financial accounts and insurance policies. The goal is to create a legal architecture around the wealth that is airtight enough to survive the artist's death without becoming a source of conflict and litigation. It costs money and time to put that architecture in place, but it costs significantly more in money, in time, in emotional damage, in attorney fees, and in family relationships when that architecture does not exist and the courts have to build one retroactively. And through all of this, through every legal filing and every court date and every headline about estate disputes and family conflict, the music keeps playing. Bad and Boujee is still on playlists. The Last Rocket is still being streamed. Takeoff's verses on Migos records are still being quoted and referenced and celebrated by fans who loved him then and love him now. The legacy is intact. The art is untouchable. Whatever happens in those courtrooms cannot reach the actual music, cannot diminish what Takeoff created or the impact he had on hip-hop culture. That part is permanent. But the financial dimension of his legacy, the catalog, the royalties, the publishing rights, the ongoing income streams tied to everything he recorded, that part is very much in motion. And how it ultimately gets resolved will determine who benefits from Takeoff's work for the years and decades ahead. It will determine whether his mother, who raised him and stood by him and watched him become who he became, is the one who gets to steward that legacy going forward, or whether a legal process built on statutory definitions and biological relationships produces a different outcome. That is the real weight of this story. That is why the culture is paying attention. Not just because of the numbers, not just because of the legal drama, but because at the center of all of it is a man who deserved his flowers while he was here, who never got enough of them, and whose memory now deserves to be protected and honored by the people and the systems that claim to speak for him. What do you think about the situation surrounding Takeoff's estate and who should have control of his legacy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and tap in with the content on screen for more stories like this one. We will see you next time, fam.